So this is pretty horrible. American Airlines Flight 5342 that was carrying 60 passengers and 4 crew members crashed into a BlackHawk helicopter that was owned by the U.S. Army out of Fort Belvoir. And they crashed right off of the landing strip over by Reagan International Airport while Flight 5342 was flying in from Wichita, Kansas. The plane model contained 65 seats with 44 in the main cabin and 12 in the section called the main extra cabin and 9 in first class, according to the company. Now, the UH-60 Blackhawk that was out of Fort Belvoir was just on a training flight, according to some military officials that have commented on it. Here's a photo of the approximate crash site right out there near Arlington County. So far, they're saying that there was at least 3 soldiers on board the helicopter when it collided with the aircraft on Wednesday and crashed into the Potomac River. Apparently, people are saying that there were several members of the U.S. figure skating community that were on board the American Airlines Flight 5342 when it collided with the military helicopter. Now, there was about 300 emergency responders that responded to this situation last night that were rushing to the scene immediately after the crash took place around 8:58 p.m. on Wednesday, which is 10 minutes after the collision took place. Now, prior to the helicopter crashing into the aircraft, there was an air traffic control tower that was recording the audio for it.
S25, get the CRJ in flight. S25, pass on this CRJ.
This club has a aircraft in sight for precision separation.
Separate. The 472 Washington Tower, 1 star, 32017. American 3130, go around, turn left in 250, claim maintain 3000.
And that's where it cuts out. And this video is straight from the air traffic control tower right here. And you can see the PAT 25 is the helicopter, which is typically like a call sign for a helicopter that's carrying VIPs. And you can see the plane was coming in to land at that northern runway right there. And they just kept heading towards each other. And then that's when they crashed. So it's a tragic situation. I keep hearing tons of stories about people who were like waiting for their girlfriends or their boyfriends or waiting for their families to arrive. And, you know, they had just talked to them maybe a half an hour before. It's the whole thing's tragic. Here's a photo of the helicopter as it's laying in the Potomac River. And then they also had some, thermal imaging of the plane crash site when rescue boats were showing up. So later this morning, the DC fire chief basically broke the news to everybody that we were all kind of dreading on hearing.
We are now at a point where we are switching from a rescue operation to a recovery operation. At this point, we don't believe there are any survivors from this accident. And we have recovered 27 people from the plane and 1 from the helicopter. The district office of the medical examiner has lead on reuniting these bodies and these people with their loved ones, and we will continue to work to find all the bodies and collect them and reunite them with their loved ones. We should also acknowledge that the Virginia medical examiner and the Army medical examiner are involved in this operation and a very important part of getting the...
Yeah. So there you have it. He said that they are switching from a search and rescue mission to a recovery mission this morning. So it's now almost 8 p.m. and I'm sure that I hope that they've recovered everybody else, but they didn't anticipate any survivors. So now this morning, the Department of Defense posted a video of the new Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, in his office, or in a office, and he had some updates for us on it. So let's listen what he had to say.
All right, update this morning. Just got off the phone with the Southcom commander and the chairman, the Joint Chiefs, talking about our efforts at Guantanamo Bay. That is ongoing. We're leaning forward on supporting the president's directive to make sure that we have a location for violent criminal illegals as they are deported out of the country. No one's going to wait on the Defense Department, and we're working that in real time. But I also wanted to give an update on the tragedy that happened last night here in Washington, D.C., and provide a little bit more information as we are actively working to investigate and understand what occurred and why. At about 8:48 last night, a UH-60 assigned to the U.S. Army Aviation Brigade in the Military District of Washington, Fort Belvoir, Virginia, collided tragically with a civilian airliner. The unit involved, the Army unit involved, was Bravo Company 12th Aviation Battalion at Fort Belvoir.
Okay, 12th Aviation.
Annual proficiency training flight. And when we look at the crew, and not all kin have been notified, so we're going to withhold ranks and names at this point. We do know on our side who was involved. It was a fairly experienced crew, and that was doing a required annual night evaluation. They did have night vision goggles.
Okay.
The 12th Aviation Battalion, as of now, is granted a 48-hour operational pause on contingency missions as what happened is reviewed, and a senior level aviation team, an investigative team from our Aviation Safety Center, was deployed last night and already is in Washington, D.C. to investigate what's going on. We anticipate that the investigation will quickly be able to determine whether the aircraft was in the corridor and at the right altitude at the time of the incident. As I mentioned, next of kin notifications are ongoing. It's a tragedy, a horrible loss of life for those 64 souls on that civilian airliner, and of course, the 3 soldiers in that BlackHawk. They're in our prayers, their families, and their communities. As people are notified, I can't imagine. And I know it's gone from a rescue mission to a recovery mission, and we're with all the first responders that are moving actively too. So at the Defense Department, our thoughts and prayers go out. We are actively investigating to find out what happened and why. And as we get updates, you will have them. God bless.
So later on in the day, after the Secretary of Defense came out with an update, the president held a press conference with the vice president at the White House. So I want to hear what the updates were. I never got to listen to it because I was at work all day today, so I kind of got disconnected from it, but I want to hear what he had to say about the incident. So let's give it a listen.
Thank you. I'd like to request a moment of silence for the victims and their families, please. Thank you very much. I speak to you this morning in an hour of anguish for our nation. Just before 9 p.m. last night, an American Airlines regional jet carrying 60 passengers and 4 crew collided with an Army BlackHawk helicopter.
So just to put this in context, this is the worst aviation disaster that this country's had since 9/11. So to make sure that the gravity of the situation is understood by everybody out there.
Carrying 3 military service members over the Potomac River in Washington, D.C., while on final approach to Reagan National Airport. Both aircraft crashed instantly and were immediately submerged into the icy waters of the Potomac. Real tragedy. The massive search and rescue mission was underway throughout the night, leveraging every asset at our disposal, and I have to say the local, state, federal, military including the United States Coast Guard in particular. They've done a phenomenal job.
Shout
So
out to
quick,
Coast Guard.
So fast. It was mobilized immediately. The work has now shifted to a recovery mission. Sadly, there are no survivors. This was a dark and excruciating night in our nation's capital and in our nation's history,
Yeah.
and a tragedy of terrible proportions. As one nation, we grieve for every precious soul that has been taken from us so suddenly. And we are a country of we are in mourning. This is really shaking a lot of people, including people, very sadly, from other nations who were on the flight. For the family members back in Wichita, Kansas, here in Washington, D.C., and throughout the United States and in Russia, we have a Russia contingent, some very talented people. Unfortunately, were on that plane. Very, very, very sorry about that. Whose loved ones were aboard the passenger jet. We can only begin to imagine the agony that you're all feeling. Nothing worse. On behalf of the First Lady, myself, and 340 million Americans, our hearts are shattered alongside yours, and our prayers are with you now and in the days to come. We'll be working very, very diligently in the days to come. We're here for you to wipe away the tears and to offer you our devotion, our love, and our support. There's great support. In moments like this, the differences between Americans fade to nothing compared to the bonds of affection and loyalty that unite us all, both as Americans and even as nations. We are one family, and today we are all heartbroken. We're all searching for answers. That icy, icy Potomac, it was a cold, cold night, cold water. We're all overcome with the grief for many who have so tragically perished, will no longer be with us. Together we take solace in the knowledge that their journey ended not in the cold waters of the Potomac, but in the warm embrace of a loving God. We do not know what led to this crash, but we have some very strong opinions and ideas, and I think we'll probably state those opinions now. Because over the years I've watched as things like this happen, and they say, well, we're always investigating, and then the investigation 3 years later, they announce it. We think we have some pretty good ideas, but we'll find out how this disaster occurred, and we'll ensure that nothing like this ever happens again.
I hope
the
not.
FAA and the NTSB and the U.S. military will be carrying out a systematic and comprehensive investigation. Our new Secretary of Transportation, Sean Duffy, his second day on the job when that happened. It's a rough one. We'll be working tirelessly. He's a great gentleman. The whole group these are great people, and they are working tirelessly to figure out exactly what happened. We will state certain opinions, however. I'm also immediately appointing an acting commissioner to the FAA, Christopher Rocheleau, a 22-year veteran of the agency, highly respected. Christopher, thank you very much. Appreciate it. We must have only the highest standards for those who work in our aviation system. I changed the Obama standards from very mediocre at best to extraordinary. You remember that. Only the highest aptitude, they have to be the highest intellect and psychologically superior people were allowed to qualify for air traffic controllers. That was not so prior to getting there. When I arrived in 2016, I made that change very early on because I always felt this was a job that, and other jobs too, but this was a job that had to be superior intelligence, and we didn't really have that, and we had it. And then when I left office and Biden took over, he changed them back to lower than ever before. I put safety first. Obama, Biden, and the Democrats put policy first. And they put politics at a level that nobody's ever seen, because this was the lowest level. Their policy was horrible, and their politics was even worse. So as you know, last week, long before the crash, I signed an executive order restoring our highest standards for air traffic controllers and other important jobs throughout the country. So it was very interesting. about a week ago, almost upon entering office, I signed something last week that was an executive order, very powerful, on restoring the highest standards of air traffic controllers and others, by the way. Then my administration will set the highest possible bar for aviation safety. We have to have our smartest people. It doesn't matter what they look like, how they speak, who they are. It matters intellect, talent, the word talent. They have to be talented, naturally talented geniuses. You can't have regular people doing that job. They won't be able to do it. But we'll restore faith in American air travel.
Yeah, I wouldn't know the
More to
first
say
thing about how to do that
wanna
job.
Point out that various articles that appeared prior to my entering office, and here's one. The FAA's diversity push includes focus on hiring people with severe intellectual and psychiatric disabilities. That is amazing. And then it says FAA says
wonder what that
people with
means.
severe disabilities are most underrepresented segment of the workforce, and they want them in, and they want them, they can be air traffic controllers. I don't think so. This was in January 14th, so that was a week before I entered office. They put a big push to put diversity into the FAA's program. Then another article, the Federal Aviation Administration, this was before I got to office, recently, second term. The FAA is actively recruiting workers who suffer severe intellectual disabilities, psychiatric problems, and other mental and physical conditions under a diversity and inclusion hiring initiative spelled out on the agency's website. Can you imagine? These are people that are, I mean, actually, their lives are shortened because of the stress that they have.
It's got to be super stressful.
Brilliant people have to
I
be
wouldn't
in
want to
those
do that job.
positions. And their lives are actually shortened, very substantially shortened because of the stress, where you have many, many planes coming into one target. And,
God, that would be, yeah.
You need a very special talent and a very special genius to be able to do it. Targeted disabilities are those disabilities that the federal government, as a matter of policy, has identified for special emphasis in recruitment and hiring. The FAA's website states they include hearing, vision, missing extremities, partial paralysis, complete paralysis, epilepsy, severe intellectual disability, psychiatric disability, and dwarfism all qualify for the position of a controller of airplanes pouring into our country, pouring into a little spot, a little dot on the map, a little runway. The initiative is part of the FAA's diversity and inclusion hiring plan. Think of that. The initiative is part of the FAA's diversity and inclusion hiring plan, which says diversity is integral to achieving FAA's mission of ensuring safe and efficient travel. I don't think so. I think it's just the opposite. The FAA website shows that the agency's guidance on diversity hiring were last updated on March 23rd of 22. They wanted to make it even more so. And then I came in, and I assume maybe this is the reason. The FAA, which is overseen by Secretary Pete Buttigieg, a real winner. That guy's a real winner. Do you know how badly everything's run since he's run the Department of Transportation?
I used to love how Joe Biden would pronounce his name.
Disaster as a mayor. He ran his
You'd call him like booty
city into
juice.
the ground, and he's a disaster now. He's just got a
booty
good line
juice.
of bullshit. The Department of Transportation, his government agency charged with regulating civil aviation. Well, he runs it, 45,000 people, and he's run it right into the ground with his diversity. So I had to say that it's terrible. Then it's a group within the FAA, another story, determined that the workforce was too white, that they had concerted efforts to get the administration to change that and to change it immediately. This was in the Obama administration just prior to my getting there. And we took care of African Americans, Hispanic Americans. We took care of everybody at levels that nobody's ever seen before. It's one of the reasons I won. but they actually came out with a directive to white. And we want the people that are competent. But now we mourn and we pray and would like to ask all Americans to join me in a moment of silence as we ask God to watch over those who have lost their lives and bring comfort to the loved ones. And I just want to say God bless everyone in this room. This has been a terrible, very short period of time.
Yeah.
We'll get to the bottom of it. So we all saw the same thing. We've seen it many times. I've had the honor of hearing tapes. Tapes are scary, very scary tapes.
Yeah.
You had a airliner coming in, American Airlines. He was doing everything right. He was on track. He was the same track as everybody else. They came in. It's probably the same track as they've had for 25 years or more. He's coming in the path. And for some reason, he had a helicopter that was at the same height, obviously when they hit, but pretty much the same height, and going at an angle that was unbelievably bad. When the air traffic controller said, "Do you see?" You know, he was talking about, "Do you see him?" But there was very little time left when that was stated. And then also he said, "Follow him in." And then almost immediately after that, you know, seconds after that, there was the crash that took place. Well, you follow him in, that means like everything's fine.
Yeah, see, that's the confusing thing to me, because it seems to me like that sounds like it was an air traffic control issue. Like maybe the air traffic controllers weren't, I don't know, maybe they weren't paying attention. I don't know. I wasn't there. I don't know what they do. I don't understand how the job works, but the way he describes it makes it sound like there was negligence on the part of the air traffic controllers. Like they weren't paying attention, or they thought that the aircrafts were at different heights or something like that. I would hope that it was just some like simple mistake that somebody made. But even if it is a simple mistake, that simple mistake cost, you know, over 60 people their lives. So, which is why that job is probably so incredibly stressful, because there are people depending on you. Their lives depend on you. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people, thousands of people every day depend on you to see the next day.
Follow him in. You had a pilot problem from the standpoint of the helicopter. I mean, because it was visual. It was a very clear night. It was cold, but clear, and clear as you could be. The American Airlines plane had lights blazing. They had all of their landing lights on. I could see it from the Kennedy Center tape. We had a tape up on the Kennedy Center. That seems to be the primary. Thus far, I'm sure we'll see other tapes because it's.
That's the video that you guys saw in the beginning of the video.
A lot of cameras looking up into the air, into space. So we'll probably see many other shots of it before too much time goes by. But we had a situation where you had a helicopter that had the ability to stop. I have helicopters. You can stop a helicopter very quickly. It had the ability to go up or down. It had the ability to turn. And the turn it made was not the correct turn, obviously. It did somewhat the opposite of what it was told. We don't know that would have been the difference because the timing was so tight. It was so little. There was so little time to think. But what you did have is you had vision. The helicopter had vision of the plane because you had vision of it all the way, perfect vision of it all the way from at Kennedy Center where the tape was taken.
That's so
For some
weird.
reason, there weren't adjustments made. Again, you could have slowed down the helicopter substantially. You could have stopped the helicopter. You could have gone up. You could have gone down.
Maybe
You could have
there's a
gone straight
mechanical
up, straight
malfunction.
down.
I don't
You could have
know.
turned. You could have done a million different maneuvers. For some reason, it just kept going. And
I
it
wonder
made
if maybe there was a mechanical
turn
or electric malfunction,
at
maybe.
the very end, and it was by that time it was too late. They shouldn't have been at the same height. because if it wasn't the same height, you could have gone under it or over it, and nobody realized, or they didn't say that it's at the same height. At the same height, still wouldn't have been great, but you would have missed it by quite a bit. Could have been 1,000 feet higher. It could have been 200 feet lower. But it was exactly at the same height, and somebody should have been able to point that out. So all of this is going to be studied, but it just seems to me, from a couple of words that I like to use, the words common sense, some really bad things happened, and some things happened that shouldn't have happened. So you had a helicopter going in an identical direction. You had a helicopter that was at the exact same height as somebody going in essentially the opposite direction. You had a plane that was following a track, which is a track that every other plane followed. And I don't imagine, I know I've heard today that they might have been following the preceding plane, which was pretty close, but not that close, the preceding plane. But you wouldn't have even been able to see that because of the direction that the helicopter was coming in at. So you had a
There's got to be a reason
of bad decisions that were made. And you have people that lost their lives, violently lost their lives. We're going to take a few questions. I'd like to ask our new Secretary of Transportation to say a few words. Sean Duffy, great gentleman, just started. It's not your fault, and I know you agree with me very strongly on intellect and even psychological well-being of the air traffic control. It's such an important position, and I think I can't emphasize stronger. I changed it when I first ran in 2016. I changed it. We had the highest standard that you could have, and then they changed it back. That was Biden, to a standard I read it to you. That was from one of your papers. One of the people in this room actually wrote that. And then I changed it back a few days ago. And unfortunately, that was, we'll see. We don't know that necessarily it's even the controller's fault. But one thing we do know, there was a lot of vision, and people should have been able to see that,
This is going to be investigated for a while.
You say, wow, that plane's getting a little bit less. So this is a tragedy that should not have happened. Please, sir.
Yeah. I'm glad that he made sure to mention that he doesn't know if it was the pilots or the air traffic controller's fault, because we don't know that. But it's like, man, it's such a complicated situation, because they were coming in and, they didn't see the other plane. And for some reason, it wasn't being communicated from the tower, maybe. Man. So far, an internal preliminary Federal Aviation Administration safety report is showing that the air traffic controller at Reagan National Airport last night was handling helicopters in the vicinity of the airport, as well as directing commercial planes taking off and landing. And apparently this is a task that's typically meant for two people, not just one. The air traffic control tower staffing was reportedly not normal for the time of day and for the level of traffic. Also, the Washington Post also reported that Tuesday, another jet that was trying to land there had to make a second approach after a helicopter appeared near its flight path, according to an audio recording from an air traffic control. Now, there's constantly military aircraft flying through that area because of all of the military presence in that area. And there's also commercial airlines obviously flying all the time because Reagan National Airport is a very busy airport. Obviously, like that's the big airport in DC, right there near Arlington. So yeah, it's going to be busy, and they need to have the right staffing for it. I don't know if the lack of staffing was the reason why this happened, or if there was something else on top of that. But I don't know. Let's listen to the Transportation Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I would just note the President's leadership has been remarkable during this crisis. We have had a whole of government response, local, state, federal, and when you see that kind of cooperation, it begins with the leadership in this body. So thank you for that, Mr. President. You make our jobs a lot easier. You made an important point that when we deal with safety, we can only accept the best and the brightest in positions of safety that impact the lives of our loved ones, our family members. And I think you make a really important point on that, Mr. President. That is the motto of your presidency, the best and the brightest, the most intelligent coming into these spaces. I want to take a moment and extend my condolences to the families of the loved ones. We commit to them that we are going to get to the bottom of this investigation, not in 3 years, not in 4 years, but as quickly as possible with the NTSB, who is here today, as well as the FAA. What happened yesterday shouldn't have happened. It should not have happened. And when Americans take off in airplanes, they should expect to land at their destination.
Yeah, they should feel safe.
That's not acceptable. And so we will not accept excuses. We will not accept passing the buck. We are going to take responsibility at the Department of Transportation and the FAA to make sure we have the reforms that have been dictated by President Trump in place to make sure that these mistakes do not happen again. And again, I want to thank you for your leadership, Mr. President, and I appreciate the confidence you placed in me. Thank you.
Pete, would you like to say something?
Well, thank you, Mr. President. Again, I want to echo what the Transportation Secretary said about your leadership. From the moment we found out about this, we were in contact with the White House trying to determine exactly what happened. I would echo it as well. No excuses. We're going to get to the bottom of this. We first and foremost, from the Defense Department, want to pass our condolences to the 64 souls and their families that were affected by this. Never should happen. And certainly the 3 service members, the 3 soldiers, a young captain, staff sergeant, and a CW2, Chief Warrant Officer, on a routine annual retraining of night flights on a standard corridor for a continuity of government mission. The military does dangerous things. It does routine things on the regular basis. Tragically, last night, a mistake was made. And I think the president is right. There was some sort of an elevation issue that we have immediately begun investigating at the DoD and Army level. Army CID is on the ground investigating. Top-tier aviation assets inside the DoD are investigating, sir, to get to the bottom of it so that it does not happen again, because it's absolutely unacceptable. But I want to echo what the Transportation Secretary and you, Mr. President, said, because it pertains to the DoD as well. We will have the best and brightest in every position possible. As you said in your inaugural, it is colorblind and merit-based. The best leaders possible, whether it's flying Blackhawks and flying airplanes, leading platoons, or in government. The era of DEI is gone at the Defense Department, and we need the best and brightest, whether it's in our air traffic control, or whether it's in our generals, or whether it's throughout government. So thank you for your leadership and courage on that, sir, and we'll stand by you on it. Thank you.
Very much. JD, please.
The Vice President.
Well, thank you, Mr. President, for your leadership. I just want to reemphasize something the President said, and you've heard from the Secretary of Transportation and of Defense. There really was a whole of government response. We were all on the phone. We were all communicating yesterday, trying to get to the bottom of this immediately, but also try to communicate with the American people about what happened. Something the President said that I think bears reemphasizing, which is that when you don't have the best standards in who you're hiring, it means, on the one hand, you're not getting the best people in government, But on the other hand, it puts stresses on the people who are already there. And I think that is a core part of what President Trump is going to bring and has already brought to Washington, D.C. is we want to hire the best people because we want the best people at air traffic control, and we want to make sure we have enough people at air traffic control who are actually competent to do the job. If you go back to just some of the headlines over the past 10 years, you have many hundreds of people suing the government because they would like to be air traffic controllers, but they were turned away because of the color of their skin. That policy ends under Donald Trump's leadership because safety is the first priority of our aviation industry. Thank you, Mr. President.
I didn't realize there was lawsuits.
And the claims that you've made, are you saying this crash was somehow caused and the result of diversity hiring? And what evidence have you seen to support these claims?
It just could have been. We have a high standard. We've had a much higher standard than anybody else. And there are things where you have to go by brain power. You have to go by psychological quality. And psychological quality is a very important element of it. These are various very powerful tests that we put to use, and they were terminated by Biden. And Biden went by a standard that's the exact opposite. So we don't know, but we do know that you had two planes at the same level. You had a helicopter and a plane. That shouldn't have happened. And we'll see. We're going to look into that, and we're going to see. But certainly for an air traffic controller, we want the brightest, the smartest, the sharpest. We want somebody that's psychologically superior, and that's what we're going to have. Yeah. Yeah, please, go ahead.
Mr. President, you mentioned at the top of the briefing that there were several Russian nationals on the flight.
Yes.
Will the U.S. government be willing to facilitate the transfer of their remains, considering
Yes, we
the
will.
fact there is no direct air travel between the two countries?
We've already been in contact with Russia, and the answer is yes, we will facilitate. Yes. Please, go ahead.
So they're talking about what they're talking about, just for context. God. Apparently, a guy named John Maravilla, an American Paris figure skater, told RIA Novosti, a Russian state news agency, that there were about 14 figure skaters on the plane, not counting their parents and coaches. He didn't name who they were. Russian state news agencies also reported that 3 former figure skaters from Russia were on the plane. Apparently, the skating club of Boston, whose CEO is a guy named Doug Zegaby, said six of the victims were from the Boston club, including 2 coaches, 2 teenage athletes, and 2 moms of athletes. He said, quote, "Our sport and this club have suffered a horrible loss with this tragedy," end quote. Zegaby identified the skaters from the skating club of Boston as Jenna Ha and Spencer Lane. Ha's mother, Jin Han, and Lane's mother, Christine Lane, were also on board. Then he identified the 2 coaches as Evgenia Shishkova and Vadim Naumov. And those two were world pair champions who joined the club in 2017, according to Zigbee. Yeah, so I haven't been able to find any names of the Russian nationals that were the figure skaters on the plane, but it's good that they're going to manage repatriating them back to Russia, because right now there's no flights going from the U.S. to Russia, so I'm glad they're going to work that out. That's the right thing to do.
The situation in the Democratic Republic of the Congo is getting worse, even though President John Lorenzo has been mediating the conflict between Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of the Congo because he wants to bring peace and stability. The situation is really bad right now. I want to hear from Ms. President if you have any plan in the future to bring peace in the
Well,
Democratic
you're asking me a
Republic
question
of the
about
Congo.
Rwanda, and it is a very serious problem. I agree, but I don't think it's appropriate right now to talk about it, but it is a very serious problem.
Mr. President, we don't even yet know the names of the 67 people who were killed, and you are blaming Democrats and DEI policies and air traffic control and seemingly the member of the U.S. military who was flying that BlackHawk helicopter. Don't you think you're getting ahead of the investigation right now?
No, I don't think so at all. I don't think were the names of the people. You mean the names of the people that are on the plane? You think that's going to make a difference? They are a group of people that have lost their lives. If you want a list of the names, we can give you that. We'll be giving that very soon. We're in coordination with American Airlines. We're in coordination very strongly, obviously, with the military. But I think that's not a very smart question. I'm surprised coming from you. Please.
Thank you, President Trump. Thank you for being here. Based on your analysis so far, do you have a sense of who was at fault, if it was the plane, the helicopter, air traffic control, and can you assure people that it is safe to fly in and out of D.C.?
Well, I've given you the analysis, and the analysis was it was based on vision. You had a lot of people that saw what was happening. You had some people that knew what was happening. There was some warnings, but the warnings were given very, very late. You know, those warnings were given very late. It was almost as they were given. A few seconds later, there was the crash. It should have been brought up earlier. But the people in the helicopter should have seen where they were going. I can't imagine people with 20/20 vision not seeing, you know, what's happening up there. Again, they shouldn't have been at the same height. You're going in reverse directions or sideways directions. Obviously, you want to be at different heights. I see it all the time when I'm flying. You have planes going in the opposite. They're always lower, we're higher, or so if somehow there's a screw up, there's not going to be a tragedy. It'll be close, but you know, there's never going to be a tragedy if you're at a different elevation. For whatever reason, they were at the same elevation. And also, from the American Airlines standard, he's along the track that every plane is along. You say, what was a helicopter doing in that track? It's very sad. But visually, somebody should have been able to see and taken that helicopter out of play, and they should have been at a different height.
I think more than likely, if I had to take a stab at it, it would probably be a combination of things, right? Because it's possible that their vision was somewhat obstructed because they were probably wearing night vision goggles. They're probably wearing NVGs, and your field of view is reduced. Like, you don't have as good peripheral vision when you're wearing NVGs in a helicopter at night. And then on top of that, the communication from the actual, air traffic controllers potentially had an impact on it as well. I don't remember, or I didn't hear the full conversation between the two, But, you know, obviously it had an impact for sure. But I definitely think it's not just one thing. I think it's a combination of things. I think it's probably the communication piece. I think it's possible that the military aircraft, the Blackhawk, potentially had their vision obscured for some reason, in some way. And, you know, there's no telling. Or maybe they had some mechanical malfunctions. Maybe they had electric malfunctions. Maybe their gauges weren't reading correctly. You know, maybe their gauge was broken. Maybe, I don't know, because I would imagine there's an elevation gauge in a helicopter. Maybe the elevation gauge was broken. Maybe it was reading one number when they were actually at a different number. You know, it could be a number of things. You know, at the end of the day, like, all these people lost their lives. So, you know, I hope they figure out what the problem was so that they can prevent it from happening again in the future. I think that's the main thing.
Thank you, sir. You mentioned the Russians that were on board that plane. What other nationalities were on board that passenger?
There were a couple of others. We're going to be announcing it in about an hour. We have some very specific information. We're calling the countries. We've spoken to most of them, but there were some other countries represented.
Okay. According to News Nation, it says that officials said at least 27 bodies were recovered, 28 bodies were recovered from the Potomac River by Thursday night. Okay, so that must be the most updated number, at least 28 bodies. And the plane was carrying 64 people. At least one was pulled from the helicopter, which had 3 soldiers on board. The DC and Fire and EMS Chief John A. Donnelly said during a news conference today that he is confident that all of the bodies from the crash will ultimately be recovered. He says it may take us a little bit of time and it may involve some more equipment. Cedarville University in Ohio confirmed Thursday that one of the victims of the crash was a student named Grace Maxwell, who was an engineering student at the university in Ohio. God, these figure skaters, man. Some of these figure skaters were like 12, 11, 14, like figure skater Brielle Bayer, 12 years old, and her mother, Donna and Peter Livingston, along with their 2 daughters, Everly, who's 11, and Lydia, who was 14. They were all coming back from a figure skating competition in Kansas. The first officer, Sam Lilly, was one of the crew members that was tragically killed in the crash. His father, Tim Lilly, confirmed, and Sam Lilly was a pilot for PSA Airlines, which is owned by American Airlines. Flight attendant Ian Epstein from Charlotte, North Carolina, was one of the people that lost their lives. His family was notified. Donacia Brown was the other flight attendant on the plane. Her cousin by marriage, Carolyn Edwards, confirmed to NBC News. Okay, here we go. So the Russian figure skaters, I'm just finding this now, spokesman Dmitry Peskov told reporters that Russian figure skaters Evgenia Shishkova and Vadim Naumov. Okay, so those were the 2 Russian figure skaters. They're not. I think they're coaches now, but they were on the plane as well. A Kansas farming couple, Bob Schrock and his wife Lori Schrock. The Schrocks were farmers in Southwest Kansas along the Oklahoma border, according to the Kansas City Star. Father coming home after his friend's trip, Mikey Stovall. He was coming home after an annual trip to Wichita to hunt duck and pheasant with friends, according to his mother, Christina Stovall. And there's also some D.C. area steam fitters union members that were on board. Oh, here's something that's important. So people who believe they have family members on the flights and are looking for further information are being asked to call 800-697-8215. So let's get back to the press conference.
I have not, no.
Mr. President, on your executive
Not about this.
On your executive order, you've already issued an executive order you say will restore aviation safety.
Right.
This crash happened after that. Was the executive order successful, and what more needs to change to keep people safe?
Well, you know, we issued it 3 days ago, and we're in the process of making those changes. This is something that should have been done a long time ago. Actually, my original order should have never been changed, and I think maybe you wouldn't have had this problem. Maybe. Yeah, please, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. We see like everyday life that very often those diversity hires cause sometimes issues, as you just mentioned. So what plan do you have? Are we going to see some fire? Are you going to fire some of those diversity hire in the federal government? What plan do you have?
I would say the answer is yes. If we find that people aren't mentally competent, you see the language. The language is put out by them. And if you see that, I'm not going to bore you by reading it again, but these are not people that should be doing this particular job. They'd be very good for certain jobs, but not people that should be doing this particular job.
Mr. President, you have today blamed the diversity elements, but then told us that you weren't sure that the controllers made any mistakes. You then said perhaps the helicopter pilots were the ones who made the mistake.
It's all under investigation.
I understand that. That's why I'm trying to figure out how you can come to the conclusion right now that diversity had something to do with this crash.
Because I have common sense, okay? And unfortunately, a lot of people don't. We want brilliant people doing this. This is a major chess game at the highest level. When you have 60 planes coming in during a short period of time, and they're all coming in different directions, and you're dealing with very high-level computer work and very complex computers. And one of the other things I will tell you is that the systems that were built, I was going to rebuild the entire system, and then we had an election that didn't turn out the way it should have. But they didn't build the systems properly. They spent a lot of money renovating a system, spending much more money than they would have spent if they bought a new system for air traffic controllers, meaning the computerized systems. There are certain companies that do a very good job. They didn't use those companies. They used companies that should not have been doing it. No, I think it's very important to understand that for some jobs, and not only this, but air traffic controllers, they have to be at the highest level of genius. Okay.
I want to ask you about the ice skaters in a moment because the U.S. Ice Skating Committee was affected. But first, if I can, the cited FAA text that you read is real. But the implication that this policy is new or that it stems from efforts that began under President Biden or the Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg is demonstrably false. It's been on the FAA's website.
Who said that, you?
No, it's on the website, the FAA's website. It was there in 2013. It was there for the
Take
entirety.
a look. What I read.
It was there for the entirety of your administration,
Nice and easy.
too. So my question is, why didn't you change the policy during your first administration?
I did change it. I changed the Obama policy, and we had a very good policy. And then Biden came in, and he changed it. And then when I came in 3 days ago, I signed a new order bringing it to the highest level of intelligence. Okay.
It was on the website.
Please.
I think that some of this stuff is kind of just semantics because, like, here's like the facts. Going back and forth about like the policy stuff, maybe not as, I don't know if it's as productive because it's kind of like tomato stuff, right? What is true that, you know, the vice president said, that the secretary of defense said, that the president said, the main meat and potatoes that I think people should be focused on is the fact that you do need to have the most qualified candidates that are running as air traffic controllers because, you know, millions of people's lives are in their hands every day. So that's a fact. That shouldn't be something that you're hiring people on based on demographics. It should be something that you're hiring people based on skill, experience, and, you know, intellect, and just people that are the most qualified for the job, no matter where they are from, no matter what they look like, none of that stuff, because there's so many lives that are in their hands on a daily basis. And that piece, I think, is the main reason why they're bringing it up. I don't think that focusing on the whole DEI policy stuff is productive because it's a very controversial thing right now for everybody. Because you can see like some of these reporters over here are asking things about like previous policies, and he's talking like President Trump's talking about new policies. I don't think that the policy discussion really is as important. I mean, obviously it is because it dictates how some of this stuff is done, but I don't really think that, you know, as long as they work it out to figure out how to make sure you arrive at the place where, hey, now we are focused on only hiring the most qualified candidates, then it's good. I think some of this conversation going back and forth is just kind of superfluous because it's just like people talking about previous administrations, talking about the current administration or the two previous administrations, and all that stuff. It's semantics to a certain degree. I think, like I said, main focus, hiring the most qualified people for the job because they have hundreds of thousands and millions of people's lives in their hands. I think that's the main purpose of why he was bringing that stuff up.
Quiet.
Welcome back to the. I'm sorry. You mentioned that a vision was probably the problem that was at issue in this crash. There's been some reports that one of the pilots in the helicopter may have been using night vision equipment. Was there any?
I heard that. We don't know. We're going to know that pretty soon. It may change your viewplane if you do have the night vision. So
yeah,
it's very possible that could have happened.
Okay, I'm glad that he he said it may change what you can see, because that is accurate. That's true. I mean, if you're wearing night vision goggles, like I said, it will definitely cut off your peripherals significantly.
That would be maybe a reason why you wouldn't actually see as well as on a clear night. You can see sometimes better without it. Had a couple of more.
Mr. President, is it helpful to have your Secretary of Transportation confirmed, and does this intensify your interest in getting other nominees confirmed quickly?
Go to what?
Is it helpful to have your Secretary of Transportation confirmed, and does this intensify your interest in getting other nominees confirmed quickly as well?
Well, sure. We want fast confirmations, and the Democrats, as you know, are doing everything they can to delay them. They've taken too long. We're struggling to get very good people that everybody knows are going to be confirmed, but we're struggling to get them out faster. We want them out faster. It's a good question, actually.
It's a very long, slow process.
We've been pushing Sean. Everyone knows Sean for a long time. He got many, many Democrat votes, but they want to take as long as they can. They ask questions like some of the questions that Peter would ask that were totally irrelevant and not very good questions, but they want to just keep it going. They want to keep it going as long as...
He's definitely back, man. That's one of the things I remember about his previous tenure as president was some of the things he would say to some of the press. It was just funny. It's just like he has no filter. It's funny. But he's very candid. Some people would call that crass, but it is funny.
As possible. I was very honored, actually, that you got so many Democrat votes. That was really good.
Also, if you didn't know that Tulsi Gabbard's Senate confirmation hearing was today, and so was Kash Patel. They were both today. So that's part of the reason why he's probably referring to that.
That was really good.
When I apply to meet with the families, and second question, is it your impression that military training was done during that time?
The what?
The training that the helicopter was involved in. Is it anything you can tell us about
You
that?
don't know. These are the things that will come up with the investigation. You don't know, but the helicopter obviously was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and a tragedy occurred. Please.
Question about
No, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. You've been critical of the current regulations, and you've called for big reforms at FAA. I'm curious, sir.
I made the reforms, actually.
What is your message?
3 days ago, I made the
Yes,
reforms.
sir. What is your message then to the American public in the weeks and months ahead? Should they feel hesitant to fly? And if you could clarify perhaps something that the Defense Secretary said when he said that this helicopter was on a continuity of government mission?
I don't know what that refers to, but they were practicing. They do that. They call it practicing, and they were, and that's something that should be done. It's only continuity in the sense that we want to have very good people, and that has to be in continuity, and that's what they refer to. But it was basically practice, and it was a practice that worked out very, very badly. Okay.
On his question, the first question, should people be hesitant to fly right now?
No, not at all. I've not hesitated to fly. This is something that it's been many years that something like this has happened, and
I would venture to say that every single air traffic controller across the entire country and every team on the air traffic controlling staff is probably going to be like, we need to make sure we are staffed appropriately at all times going forward, because we do not want to end up doing this same thing ourselves. So I would guess that it's going to get even more tight and even more strict as far as like making sure that everybody is where they need to be at all times now, just because they don't want to have a repeat of this.
Collision is just something that we don't expect ever to happen again. We are going to have the highest level people. We've already hired some of the people that you've already hired for that position long before we knew about this. I mean, long before. From the time I came in, we started going out and getting the best people because I said it's not appropriate what they're doing. I think it's a tremendous mistake. You know, they like to do things and they like to take them too far, and this is sometimes what ends up happening. Now, with that, I'm not blaming the controller. I'm saying there are things that you could question, like the height of the helicopter, the height of the plane being at the same level and going in opposite directions. It's not a positive. But no, we're already hiring people. No, flying is very safe. We have the safest flying anywhere in the world, and we'll keep it that way. Thank you all very much. Thank you very much.
Okay, so there's an update. Says that at least 40 bodies have been recovered by 5:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, according to law enforcement sources. I'm sure they're going to be continuing to work throughout the evening to continue to recover the bodies of people that were on there. Anyway, this whole situation is awful. It's tragic. It is a terrible thing. So I hope that none of you out there knew anybody that was on this plane, and I hope that none of your friends and none of your family was on this plane. But if they were, my heart goes out to you guys, and regardless, like, my condolences to the families and the kids and the loved ones that were lost on this thing. So definitely, I can't even imagine. I can't imagine losing all those people from your family, especially the figure skaters, man, because they all lost so many people from their community in general. So anyway, I hope that they figure out what happened, because this can't happen again. We've got to make sure that this is the last time that this happens.